Jenkins.
Hey, everyone.
And he has been responsible for a lot of stuff. Co-creator of the Sentry. He's done so much with Spider-Man. He gave us Wolverine's definitive origin. Hell, a lot of stuff that's been done with Immortal Hulk came from his Hulk run.
It's true.
Yep. You've done some of my favorite issues. The Mets, maybe next year, one of my favorite Spider-Man issues of all time.
Yeah, you might not be surprised at how often I hear that, Robert. That issue is one that I hear about all the time.
Yeah, I adore that issue. It's just so heartwarming, so touching, and it gives even more stuff between him and you were one of the best handling of the history between Peter and Uncle Ben. I don't think many people have touched on it as much as you have.
Yeah. It's really about a boy and his relationship with his father figure or his grandparent or something like that, and that particular issue you're talking about is one that I've had people come up to me over many years and just usually they're crying. Usually the issue is really well read and they got it in both hands and they're like really emotional about it. So yeah.
And your final issue you did on Spectacular, which was the play and everything, was also a great one. But let's start. From what I understand, you were originally an editor with Mirage with TMNT, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I started off with the Ninja Turtles, and I hadn't planned on going to comic books as my career. I actually studied to be an actor, but I spent most of my time in film school. Mm-hmm. And but I came over to the United States. I was teaching music and drama to learning disabled children in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. I was 20, and it blew up. I met the guys that did the Ninja Turtles, and I got a job with them, and it was crazy because I was the third employee. They had an office person and a guy doing licensing, but the licensing guy, it's fair to say he had some expensive habits.
Oh no! Without going into specifics.
And so he wasn't really paying attention too much sometimes to his job, and so I was this young kid just in the offices, and I got to know Kevin and Pete pretty well, and I was very friendly with Kevin especially, but I was quite friendly with Pete too. And next thing you know, we were all excited because it was doing so well that we moved across the office to a larger office, and we thought that was great, but it blew up, and I was in the maelstrom right in the middle of it.
Yep. So what about you led from that to working at Marvel, like the Werewolf by Night series, which I gotta say, that's a perfect. I know that was not as long back as it seems to imply. Was that designed to be looking like an old-fashioned book?
I'm not sure it was intended to be old-fashioned. I mean, understand that before I worked at Marvel, right? Mm-hmm. By that time, I'd been in the industry for about 7 years, right? I started with Ninja Turtles, but then I went on to become an editor-in-chief in Cincinnati at a short-lived company called Majestic, who actually gave it a start to any number of amazing people, right? Like Jamal Eagle and all kinds of people.
Oh yeah, I had Jamal. No, I haven't met him. I haven't had him on, but I met him.
Yeah. So a lot of those young kids like us, I was the editor-in-chief. I mean, when I was 24 years old, I was a director of marketing, production. I was editor-in-chief at Tundra Publishing. So I was lucky enough to edit books by Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, Dave McKean. Yep. It was crazy, and I was this kid.
Yeah.
And what happened? What happened was that I went to Northampton, United States, and I was living in the States in Northampton, and I went to Northampton in England to sit with Alan Moore about some work that he was doing with us. I think it was From Hell actually at the time.
Right.
And you don't realize what kind of piece of history you're making, And I sat with Alan, and I was the editor on a book called Big Numbers, which some people may remember, but it was kind of Alan's unfinished work, and it was just a work of genius. And it fell apart. It got broken pretty badly, and it couldn't be finished. And I remember sitting with Alan, and he showed me this incredible chart he had that showed each character and what would happen to them through the 12 issues. It was so brilliantly done. But as we were talking, I sort of said to him, Alan, the way that you write, it's funny, because I would never assume at 24 years old to be like Alan Moore, right? But it's just the things that you're saying, Alan, are things that I've thought for a long time. You know, like I agree with you. You know, I see what you're doing and I understand what you're telling me, and it's like amazing to listen to you. But you know, I'm sort of thinking this way. And I said, do you think maybe I should move away from editing and go to writing? And he said, give it a shot. You know, he's a really nice guy, right? He's a really pleasant guy. Right. Certainly wonderful to me, you know. And so based on him sort of saying, yeah, you know, try that. I went to San Diego Comic-Con and I met the editor of Hellblazer, and I had never written anything. And I tried out for Hellblazer and they gave me the job.
Right. Oh yeah, the Hellblazer book. We'll be getting to that one. Because I know Nerdette, who's in the stream, in the chat, I mean, she adores Constantine. Constantine, kind of ironic. It's because, okay, you'll laugh at this. She does not care for the Ninja Turtles because she waited hours for an Injustice, tournament so they can see a trailer of who's going to be the next DLC. She kept thinking it was going to be Constantine. She sees a guy in a trench coat. She thinks, oh my God, it's Constantine. And then once she sees the turtle, she's like, what the fuck? I waited hours for this. And it's not Constantine. She's hated the turtles ever since.
Sorry about that, Nerdette, but what can you say?
What can you say?
It certainly wasn't my fault. So.
Oh, I know. It wasn't your fault, but since you've worked with the Turtles and you've worked on Constantine, I figured I'd tell you that. Yeah. But I've heard a lot of great stuff about your Hellblazer run, and how, from what I've heard from people, you brought a lot of what James Delano, is that you say his name?
James Delano, yeah.
Yep, and Garth Ennis, you brought a lot of their story arcs to a close, from what I understand. I haven't read your run on this particular one because Hellblader's never been my thing, but I did look into it, and that's what I'm noticing. Was that your intent, to bring a lot of closure to some of their plot points?
I think it's important to try to ride on the back of the people that have come before you and make something interesting out of it. I don't think it's a good idea to just change anything that other people have done, so much as use it and see if there's not something interesting in it. So probably I tried to do that. More though, I mean, I think each, Jamie and Garth and myself each had our own sort of unique voice.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, Jamie was very political, I think, and he was I'm also a child of the punk era, so I had a lot of that in me, and there's my version of Constantine. But Garth was very much talking about, probably, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but my own interpretation would be, Garth talked a little bit more about like his view of like religion and organized religion. And I talked about the magic of the English countryside, because I grew up in the West Country of England, and I grew up in a farm. I lived in the middle of it. And so a lot of my stuff was about the magic in England. And John kind of goes out of the city in my run and goes to the country, and just, as a kid, my brother and I would walk along green lanes, and we knew the magic. We lived in it, So a lot of the stories that you see in my version of Hellblazer are things that I did. There's a very particular one. If you go to issue 97.
97. Let me go right up here. Right here.
I remember off the top of my head the numbers, right? So 97 is a story about when things kind of, that was actually ending Garth's run. He'd given up his part of his soul, and now he was free to start again. And the story in many ways was about how even if you put someone in a gate, go around in a circle, they start again, they're probably going to go around in that same circle. Like John doesn't necessarily learn. But that gypsy, Tom, and those stories, that was me as a little boy. And all of my life, people that know me personally know that one of the strange quirks of me is that I will walk into forests in the middle of the night and just walk through them.
Really?
Yeah, I like to do it. I like to confront the things that I'm afraid, because my dad left when I was very, very young. I was 5 years old.
Gotcha.
And so I think I kind of raised myself. So did my brother. And one of the things I was really prone to doing was walking in the forest at nighttime just by myself to confront anything that I was afraid of. And there, John goes into this thing and he confronts somebody. And you see that page you got right there, right? Right there.
Yep.
That's my boss right there. That's the badger. He's the boss of the he's the most important animal. And I am lucky enough to have sat with an old gypsy. That guy called Tom, who's in the story, is actually someone who was probably one of the only father figures to me when I was little. And I remember sitting in a forest with the snow and the full moon, and waiting. And eventually the badger came out, because the gypsies all look after the badger. And he came out and walked around my feet. And no one will ever see a European badger. I've had one snuff around my feet. It was crazy. So most of my experiences are written into my version of Hellblazer.
Nice.
And it's always like that with all of my work. My experiences personally, my life is written into these stories.
Right, definitely. Now, of course, your first big book from what a mainstream book was your Inhumans book, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep. And how was that title? I mean, I've gone through and looked over, and it seems to be one of the books that people look to as the go-to to understand the Inhumans. You have like Neil Gaiman's Eternals, but with you, and with the Inhumans, it's your run.
Yeah, I think the thing was that at the time I'd had a long run on Hellblazer. What people don't realize is I wrote more issues of Hellblazer than anybody, and I was coming to an end of it, and I had reached out to Marvel and begun work on Werewolf by Night. But the thing that was, I liked Werewolf by Night. I loved doing it, but at that point it was kind of unsatisfying to me, because at that point it's like people saw me as a horror guy because of Hellblazer and now Werewolf by Night. And that is far from the truth. I'm not actually much of a horror guy, right?
Right.
I just am hopefully a good story guy. I care about good stories, right? But the Inhumans came about because Jay Lee had a call from Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti, and they were taking their work at Event Comics. They were moving over to Marvel to do like a small imprint called
Marvel Knights, yeah.
And Jay called me up and said, "Hey, Paul, we've talked about working for years on a book. And so Joe and Jimmy are starting up. Would you like to do a book with me?" And I said, "Yeah, Jay, that'd be fantastic." And he said, "Well, how do you feel about the Inhumans?" which is funny because two things. Number one, Marvel to that point had never been able to make the Inhumans work.
Nope.
And I can tell you why, by the way. I actually feel like I know why.
Oh, go do tell.
Here's the problem, right? The whole premise of Black Bolt is that he is kind of a great metaphor for somebody that cannot speak their mind. He's a king, right? So he's not supposed to speak, because by speaking, everything falls apart. At least that's the way that I saw it. And you always have to interpret characters the way you want.
Right, of course.
And I found something in that, that other people perhaps hadn't seen. And so every book I had read before, or especially afterwards, they have him sort of lean out the front door and whisper something. And of course, that's the whole point of his character, is to never have him speak.
Right.
And everyone has him speak so that stuff can blow up and look pretty on the page and things explode. But it doesn't help, because the fact is he cannot speak. And so it was weird, because nobody liked the Inhumans when we took over. And I think we were into we had 12 issues, and I think we got into issue 8 or 9. And people in those days were just writing in and flipping out, like, when is Black Bolt going to say something? When's he going to do something? And to me, I'm like, I've got you. You never cared about him before, and now you care.
Exactly, because they just care for him as, again, like in World War Hulk, we just went, enough.
Yeah, enough. Yeah,
They care for him as a weapon than as a character.
Right, and I think it should be about his character. So the way that I write it is usually we still have some action in it, of course. But most of the action revolved around the people who were in the trenches and fighting and all the stuff in this conflict they had. But a lot of the personal drama was about things like this, like Black Bolt, for example, would meditate for an hour every night to make sure he didn't accidentally talk in his sleep.
Right. That makes perfect sense.
His wife had said, and she has this really important role, Medusa, in the story. She has a very, very important role. She's actually the person that sacrifices her own thing, her power, her hair, so that they can survive.
Right.
And but she says to her handmaiden at one point, as they're getting ready for the nighttime, she says, the problem is I know he loves me, but I've never heard him say it,
Right, for obvious reasons.
A lot of this was all about like people and family and love and all of that. And it was disguised as a book, that was like a superhero book,
Exactly. And like I said, I mean, I know there was at least like a ongoing beforehand. There was a graphic novel that and the Sentry had done, but yeah, it felt like nothing really clicked until your series, which that's incredible to know that. Of course, that whenever you think about the Inhumans, it's almost always you and Jay's work that people think of.
Yeah, and the thing that was interesting about it was that we won an Eisner Award for it, and I don't think Marvel had won one for quite some time before then.
Right.
So it meant something, because if you look at what Joe and Jimmy had done, they had brought 4 books prominent. They made 4 books prominent, and
Daredevil,
it was Daredevil. It was Daredevil,
Black Panther.
Black Panther, Punisher, and the Inhumans, right?
Yeah, but Punisher's the only one that kind of fell because they went with the Angel thing. Then they went with Garth Ennis afterwards. But the first attempt.
But okay, so at the time, Marvel wasn't doing very well. I mean, Marvel was in bankruptcy. Yeah. And so if you think about that here come these outsiders, Joe and Jimmy, and they suddenly popularized 3 out of the 4 books that they're allowed to do. I mean, understand that, Punisher didn't quite hit. Okay, fine. It didn't quite hit, but they don't all hit.
Exactly.
But 3 out of 4 isn't bad considering that in the Marvel universe, a lot of the other books were really struggling, right? And so I think, if you look at what we did, we won an Eisner. Kevin Smith, wrote the Daredevil book, and the sales went through the ceiling with Joe and Jimmy doing the work.
Yeah.
And finally, and I'll always say this, the one that to me seems like such a triumph was Chris Priest's Black Panther.
Yes.
Right, because the thing about it is it went 50 issues. And if you just took it in context of the time, there was no way that Black Panther was going to do 50 issues. Well,
no. Yeah, exactly. And it's one of the defining runs again. Kevin Smith's Daredevil, you guys are Inhumans, and Priest on Black Panther redefined the characters. Okay, in the case of Daredevil, it didn't redefine, but it reinvigorated the character. Because let's be honest, Frank already beat him to the punch on redefining him. But you needed Kevin to reinvigorate it to go forward.
Yeah, and the artwork was beautiful that Joe and Jimmy did, and
exactly.
So I mean, I think I feel very lucky to have come in. I'm very lucky that Jay called me, and at that point, because I had done so well, Marvel wanted more things from me.
Like Hulk, for example. Let's move on to your Hulk run. How does it feel to know so much from your run has still been utilized, like Devil Hulk and the Mindscape? I mean, that was kind of there with Peter David, but you really expanded on it more so.
It feels great. I mean, I always look at it like this, right, Robert? Like I think that anyone that follows me can do whatever they want to, and I hope that what they don't want to do is to destroy or be destructive of my work any more than I would ever want to be destructive of anybody else's work. I don't want to throw away. I want to use what other people have done and bring it. But what we did early on in talking about the Hulk, like one of the things that I think probably did well for me at Marvel is that I'm a guy that really gets very deep into character and reasoning, like why is it going on? And I said that I felt with the Hulk at the time, John Byrne had just done a run that I will say that maybe the fairest thing to say for John is that Marvel weren't digging it too much. They
even though it's what they wanted. That's the funny thing. They wanted Hulk to smash again, and it ended up biting him in the butt. They lost Peter over it, and basically it's like, okay, let's get back. We're not going to get Peter back, but let's get back.
And the way I looked at it with Peter's run was this, right? He'd done a really long run. He was very successful.
Yep.
And the one thing that I could definitely point to, like Peter's work, was that if you paid $2 for a book or whatever it was then, you got $2 worth of entertainment, maybe 3, maybe 4. Like Peter really put something in there that meant something. As opposed to a body count. And I think there was a moment in John's run that I sort of looked at personally and went, I don't know if that's, going to be something that will kind of bite, because the problem is he jumps up at one point and he flies through a jetliner and he kills 150 odd people,
which makes no sense with the Hulk. I mean, the only time it ever makes sense to the Hulk, and it's something that I love Greg Pak made clear, is when Bruce is not even involved. He's either separate, is wild.
But that makes the Hulk a mass murderer at that point, and I don't think you can come back from that. It's very difficult to come back from it, right?
It looks cool, but you're right.
Right, and so so when I took over, the first thing that we did, I was always about core, right? About the core reason for why a character, what are we doing, why are we doing this, right?
Right.
And to me, one of the things that was so core about the Hulk was when he was a ticking time bomb. When the clock was ticking, when the clock ticked, that's when it meant something, right? Like you could see this crazy stuff is really difficult, right? And so I talked to Ron Garney about it, and I said, I just want us to like make this ticking time bomb. And so I came up with a conceit that I think worked, which is we gave Bruce Banner Lou Gehrig's disease.
Right.
And he was going to die. And he knew that as he would die, the Hulk would take over, and all of the other personalities inside him that were there in the mindscape. And so he didn't know there was nothing he could do. He was going to die of Lou Gehrig's disease, and the Hulk was going to take over. And so we did have this pretty amazing thing. We created the Devil, and the Devil. As much as I loved working with Ron, and Ron really made that book his own. I did 4 issues at the end of my run with JR Jr. And Johnny and I did 2 stories with the Abomination and 2 stories that were like really heartfelt about his family. And those were really my defining stories. And the interesting thing about that was that I got to that point of the Hulk then and said, I don't know if I have any more to write. I called Tom up and said, I think I'm done with it because I don't want to write something that I don't know how to write, you know?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I got maybe a year and a half to 2 years in, and then said, I think it's probably, I don't have other things that I want to do with it yet, you know?
Exactly. And now you did tap into Devil Hulk. Okay, I might be mixing up. I know in the game, it was in Ultimate Destruction, it was Devil Hulk was his father.
Right.
I haven't reread the issue, so was that also what you had in the comic, or did you just add that to the game? I know that's something that that was done in Immortal Hulk.
For those who don't know, I wrote the game as well. So
that's why I'm bringing that up. That's why I'm bringing that up.
Yeah, there was a lot to be said. I mean, it was really an exploration, not necessarily of just those specifics, because I think when you just get into specifics like that, was this the canon? Was this the thing that we were doing? You know, it's sort of like, well, I don't know if that's as important as to say it's very much implied that his relationship that was broken with his father, his loss of Betty, his illness, all of these things that weigh upon a person, which we all go through, were driving him to a difficult place. But he had a difference between him and, you know, he and us, right? The difference between us is that we don't have a beast inside us like the Hulk that will smash everything.
Exactly.
And so it just made for interesting, intriguing kind of stories. But it's a story that we can all recognize. We've all been there. You know?
Which, by the way, I did a Let's Play of Ultimate Destruction a while back. I love that game. That is still one of the best Hulk games, but I love the story for it. Just this whole, you know, like, and the way, obviously you were working within the restrictions of you're playing Hulk all the time. You never play as Bruce throughout the game. So was that did you look at that as almost like a restriction?
No.
Or no, you didn't?
No, in fact, it was my suggestion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so here's the problem, right? So I went to work with the developer.
Remedy, right?
No, it was up in Canada.
Hold on. Let me look. Oh, Hulk.
Their name escapes me right now. They were up in Canada, but I did prototype with them as well. So
now Radical,
right? Okay.
Sorry, I was thinking Remedy because I've been doing the Alan Wake game. Radical is what it was.
Yeah, so Radical Entertainment were great, and you know, I went out there and I got to be pretty friendly with the lead designer Eric Holmes, and what they asked me to do first of all was to look at the first game they'd made, which they made in the Ang Lee time, right? And when that movie came out, they had the Hulk license, they got to make it, and they did this kind of strange game where you could stealth as Bruce Banner and stuff like that.
Oh, yep, the Ang Lee one. Yep, that was a decent game. That was a decent game, all things considered.
It was all things considered, right? But it didn't hit.
Right.
And
no, it didn't.
And so they asked me why did I think? And I said, I can tell you in about 2 seconds. We're like,
the Bruce Banner segments.
You're arrogant. No, it was nothing to do with the Bruce Banner things. It wasn't that. It was that if you think about the way you play a game, you have to mix storytelling with gameplay.
Oh, right.
And what you did in that game was go essentially down a tunnel. We call it like railing. You sometimes.
Oh, yep. On the rails, just straight forward.
But the problem with being in a tunnel is that when you come around a corner and maybe you've got an obstacle like some soldiers or some tanks or something, at that point when they're firing at you, you don't get to initiate combat.
Nope.
Right? That means that you're like attacked. You're a victim in some field. But if you were going to be the Hulk, you want to be able to just. So what we agreed to do almost immediately was to never do that again, and to make it a open world game. Like a sandbox environment.
Yep.
And basically, if you go up to the top of a building and you stand there and do nothing, then when you decide to jump down, that's when you initiate combat, which makes you a badass, right? That's
exactly.
And so we really changed the way the game felt, and then we had fun with it. And as you can see, it is so much fun. It was the #1 rated superhero game all the way up to probably for about 6 or 7 years.
It toppled Spider-Man 2.
Yep, it did.
Yeah, and I still love that game. And I did say that. I did like how in the Ang Lee game they brought in General Riker. How did you feel about them utilizing him in that game? In the game for the brief time he was utilized.
I always think it's fun. Like when my characters are used, it's flattering. It gets a little too flattering at times.
Yep, but of course, I gotta say, what were in your mind? Like, and a lot of these were Ron Garney's stuff, but the different Hulks, like the Clown Hulk and all that, like, in your eye, what was that representative? If they all represent parts of Banner, what did the Clown Hulk represent?
Well, the Clown, okay, so actually, I'll be honest with you, you'd think that we did those at random. We did not.
Oh, you didn't?
Yeah, no, we talked about the cover and we talked about the characters running out and who they might be. What would you have inside you? And my feeling was, it would be any number of things like, I can't remember off the top of my head what we decided the Clown Hulk was, but I do know that we had a list of them. So say, for example, the Clown Hulk would have represented, the side of yourself that sort of you let, compensate for darkness, for example, because a lot of comedians, are very dark and have had a dark life, and they use humor. And he's had a very dark life, and so he might potentially have a portion of his psyche that would be humorous, that would overcome the difficulty that he had, or an organized side, or repressed sexuality, or any of these other things. But we had a bunch of stuff in there that was really meaningful,
Okay, I always thought it was random, but the fact that you actually thought them all out, I'm impressed. I am so impressed.
Yep.
But then here's leading up to building up to the Abomination rematch after Betty's death. Was that something you just felt like had to be done finally because no one else had done it before you?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just that. It was just, if you take a look, if you go back a few pages in what you're showing, what we had, you have to understand that, like, when you do a villain, that villain can't just be a mustache twirling villain. It doesn't work.
No.
Right? It never works. They must believe in their own thoughts. They must feel that they're the hero of their own story.
Exactly.
You should be able to agree with some of what a villain says or does, but not agree with the methods, right?
Exactly. Right? Those are the best villains.
Yeah, those are the best villains. And so if you come in early on that story, like the Abomination was actually teaching English. He cared about literature, and he was teaching some old ladies in a writing club. And he was very dark and mysterious, and they were all kind of slightly falling in love with him,
I can believe that. And hey, also the way you handled him in Ultimate Destruction. Completely different take on Blonsky. But it worked within that game.
Yeah. And so, we had him have the capacity to be literate and to understand the human condition, and then reject it because of hate. And that is a villain, right? That's someone who knows better but won't do it, and has this hatred. And so when we had this thing, I actually have a lot of affection for those 4 issues that I did with JR for a reason.
Yep.
One of the things is that we did a big fight where they fight,
25.
drag out, yeah.
Yep.
And Johnny said to me at one point, he's like, Paul, I love the way you write, and I love that you're really cerebral, but man, this is also a punch fest, right? Like we got him. And he's right?
It was the 25th issue. You won a slugfest in the 25th issue.
And we had one, but he was like, it was his idea, right? He's like, let's set it in front of a dam.
Oh, and which, again, happens in Ultimate Destruction, too.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, and so that's where it came from. So it was Johnny said to me, look, let's set it in front of a dam. Like Emil says goodbye to the ladies, and he knows he's going to his fate, right?
Exactly, exactly.
And he says, like, you won't see me again. And
let's just say that trouble follows me.
Yeah, that's right. And then he goes and it says like he's sleeping underwater. He's just thinking he's there. And they have this big fight in front of a dam. Because as Johnny pointed out, first of all, by the way, go back another page. First of all, look at what it looks like when he walks out the water. It's amazing, right?
It is.
Really good.
And it looks like when the Hulk has done before.
Yeah, right. And then when they have the fight, Johnny said, like, Paul, when they fight, what will happen is that in front of a dam, the dam will break, and of course it makes it bigger and more expansive.
Exactly.
So I've always learned from that. I learn all the time, and I learned from that very much from what Johnny had said. Let's do that. And so we had this big fight. The dam blows up. Of course it does. And they,
of course it does.
They crack it, and it blows up the city.
Exactly.
But the other thing about it is, and I suppose I will say spoiler alert if anybody wants to read it.
Go ahead.
At the end of the story, without necessarily getting into, you can see in this sequence when they're fighting that Bruce allows the Hulk to be him,
an animal,
and he's so angry at what has happened. And there are some suggestions here. Yep. Hate. He's going hate. Hulk hates. Hate. Yes. It wasn't something that Hulk had done. He would say smash and that, but he was full of hatred. And Blonsky says to him, "Go ahead and do it.
Put us both out of our misery.
Put us both out of our misery." He wants to die, and Bruce comes back and does something to him that they would never let me do in the Marvel now. No way would they let me do the ending that I did, and the ending that we did was torture him, but not torture him physically. Psychologically, he had put Banner through this pain. And so Banner and Betty's father, General Ross, put Blonsky through the same pain by reminding him that his wife said she would never leave him no matter what happened. And of course she did.
Yeah.
And exactly. So they leave him on a loop. They replay this thing that she says to him, and they just leave him there to like be full of hatred for the rest of eternity.
Exactly. Now it says here that Ross thought to that. Would that mean that was Ross's idea that there's no way of turning it off? Or was that Bruce's idea? Because that's one thing I would say, again, bring up other writers. Pack made it very clear. And I always love the idea. Who's the bigger monster? Bruce or the Hulk? And going off of if you think Bruce is the monster, I believe it was Bruce who did it.
Yeah, I think to my mind, Bruce needed him to feel the pain that Bruce felt. So he But Ross would certainly play along because he lost his daughter.
Exactly. And again, that was a great story. And then you have the 2 parts where it's in his mind and everything, where basically he's living out the past perfect. As it says, past perfect. And as opposed to future imperfect.
That's right. And what happens is the devil gives Bruce a chance to live his perfect life.
Exactly. A life
to know his father, to be friends with General Ross. And in his perfect life, he's having these terrible dreams of things that have gone bad. And what he doesn't realize is the perfect life isn't real.
Exactly.
He just thinks it is. And he keeps seeing the devil and he can't keep it out. And what I just, sometimes you write a story and, I am always trying hard and I'm always proud of my work. But this particular story is one of my absolute favorites I ever wrote for Marvel.
Oh, yeah. I loved it. I really did love it. And then, of course, when you see the older Joe fix it. I love that. Just think it's like, welcome back to reality. Don't tell me you forgot about your old pal Joe. Which I gotta say, I know they use a lot of the dialogue for Joe in from the Ang Lee Hulk game, like, "Hey, quit running into my fist, idiot! Be paid. Paid. This is an idiot." But that's still one of my favorite renditions of Joe Fixit. That voice, I don't know who voiced him in those games, but just doing the Joe Fixit voice. But I just always love that defines Joe. Just the whole idiot, be paid. Paid. This is an idiot. Would you agree with that? That is Joe right there. That sums up Joe.
It really does, yeah.
But after your Hulk run, you also had started on to Spider-Man, of course. Mm-hmm. And first of all, we'll get to that issue in a moment. But actually, yeah, we'll do Spider-Man first, then we'll get to Sentry. With Spider-Man, one of the issues you had taken part on was the Revenge of the Green Goblin, which was an event going on along with other books. How was working on that whole thing?
It's pretty amazing. So my path to Spider-Man is one that most people would go like, "You got to be kidding me." You
okay, do tell.
Well, I turned him down for years. I
really?
Like it. Yeah, for a couple of years, Ralph Macchio, my editor there, wonderful guy, and he had asked me for a couple of years if I was interested in Spider-Man, and I said, "Ralph, I'll tell you the problem," and it really does speak to just the way I work, I suppose. I don't know what to write, because I don't understand Spider-Man at the time.
Oh.
There had been the Clone Saga and some stuff like that, but I wasn't enough of a comic book fan to know what there was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it took me a long time, and then I finally wrote a couple of single issue stories, kind of 3 of them for a thing called Tales of Web Spinners.
Yep, right here, right down here.
And the Web Spinner thing was helpful to me because I got to realize why I hadn't written anything.
Right.
And it was because he was overwhelmed with continuity. And so the story that I wrote was a story about where he goes back to the very beginning. What's the first villain that Spider-Man ever encounters? Do you know?
The burglar?
The chameleon.
Oh, the chameleon. Oh, right. Oy.
So I took him all the way back to the very first villain, and I had the chameleon come back. And the chameleon had spent many years living as other people, so he didn't know who he was.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And you felt bad for him. Like he comes back. And I got to do it with Sean Phillips, who's, I did Hellblazer with. He's just amazing, amazing artist. And they have this standoff, and the chameleon finally points out to him, "Look, Peter, like everything you do, your tragedies are amazing, your triumphs are amazing, everything that I want to be is what you are." Now, if you, spoiler alert again, but if you move forward, he's pointing a gun. Go back just a little bit.
Yep. I saw that. Oh, we go back.
He's pointing a gun at Mary Jane, and he's got Mary Jane held hostage. And of course, if you realize that it's just an illusion, he's not pointing the gun.
He's pointing at himself.
He's pointing at himself. And so at that point, Peter realizes you've got a lost person that's come to him, and he doesn't know what to, he's not faster than a speeding bullet, right?
Exactly.
And now you've got this guy, and the guy's just trying to say to him, I wish I was you, but I can't be. I don't know what to do. And here we are on top of the Brooklyn Bridge, the same place that Gwen died, right?
Exactly, which everyone knows. By this point, any criminal knows at least. I mean, I might not know the Peter connection, although in this case, he doesn't. I even like that as well. The unmask, and again, you can then accept it as, he'll eventually forget because, again, his mind's so jumbled.
Yeah. And so, he says this funny thing. It wasn't, people will ask me about it. He says, "Peter, I love you," but he's trying to say, I love who you are. And it comes out funny.
I know, that's why he's cracking up. That's why he
laughs. They both cracking up, and they both think it's really funny. They realize what's been said, and they just laugh. And
I know, I love that. I don't exactly mean I love you, at least not in the biblical sense. I mean,
Yeah. And so what we got to do was to show the real humanity. It was really my style at that point, was to find the people and to show who people were and when they were suffering and when they were struggling. And you got to see Spider-Man, the real difficulty for him, the real tragedy. He can't save everybody, and he can't save everybody, And so from that, I understood Spider-Man. That was the first two I wrote. And then I wrote one about him releasing all the continuity, stripping it back to what it should be, in my opinion. And that would be, why can't we have like fun? Why can't he be a comedian? Peter's really funny. His wisecracks are really useful. And at the time, if you just have to go back to 1999, 2000, that wasn't happening. He was constantly angry. He was lying to his wife. I just didn't see anything in there that I thought that I recognized as Spider-Man.
Yeah, you had him being the spider before the Clone Saga, things like that. It was just felt like people didn't know what to do with him.
Right. And so what you do with any of these characters is the same thing. You tell good stories and they speak to character. And here is something that, when he strips away all of these terrible tragedies and all of this continuity, he gets back to one place that he wants to be. And the place he wants to be is fighting the bad guys. And, there's something that's thematically in my work that that I don't know that other Spider-Man writers have done, was that as much as he loves Mary Jane, his true love is Gwen Stacy.
All right. I feel it's a more complicated thing. But
it's a bit more complicated. Maybe a better way of saying it is his first love, right?
Exactly.
And he can't get over his first love as much.
Exactly.
He can still love Mary Jane with all his heart.
Exactly.
But he can't get over what happened to his first love.
Exactly. I think that's better than what Alex Ross saw, which was Alex Ross. I always remember it in his Earth X had it be, she was just the runner-up, and I'm like, no, that dismisses MJ royally when you.
So I misspoke. Yeah, and what I meant was having a first love, like someone you really loved, and losing them. It doesn't preclude that you can love again, but so if you see what you're looking at right now, he's back to where he wants to be, fighting the bad guys,
without the tragedies connected to them.
Everything's now back to the early years. This is where he wants to be. He stripped everything away, but suddenly they're all gone.
Exactly.
And there's only one thing left, and that's Gwen.
Yeah, and that was brilliant. That was such a great a great issue. And but then, like I said, though, working on this one now, I gotta say, one thing I always found weird during that Revenge of the Green Goblin, there was a point where you had Howard Mackie seemed to imply, "Oh, you've been the Goblin the whole time," and it seemed like, what kind of twist was that? But you seemed to handle it pretty well from that. Like, what in the working on that, I assume in the editor's room and writer's room and all that. What was the behind the scenes stuff on that twist?
I'll tell you what it was. I had something that I thought made sense, right? I felt that the two of them were this close in some ways.
Oh, yes.
But that Norman Osborn had chosen to go this way and Peter will go this way. And so when you write a character, what you have to do is ask yourself, who is that person that I'm writing? And I have my own version of it, right?
Right, exactly.
I believe that Peter is a metaphor in a way. He's the guy who provides, say, for his family against all odds or something. Those are teachers are heroes, parents are heroes, right? And so he's like an extension of that. And that Norman is selfish. And so between the two of them, they're very close in some ways, but Norman sees in Peter that Peter could be his son and heir because he sure as hell isn't his other son,
Exactly.
He doesn't think it's Harry, right? And so he tries to persuade him, but Peter can't. Peter won't do it. And in fact, that comes full circle when Umberto Ramos and I did another Green Goblin story much later.
I saw that,
And so in this particular one, I think the thing that we did that I loved in this story, my favorite thing, like Norman's sad at what's happening.
Yeah.
Like he's torturing, but he's sad. And there's a thing that we did in my stories that I really fell in love with, which is the origin of the Green Goblin.
Yes.
Which most people don't realize was in there, but I think it was his origin is that his father mistreated him. It's like the kind of Fred Trump, Donald Trump kind of relationship where his father was really bad to him. And so his father locked him as a tiny little boy, as a 7-year-old, in a mansion that was completely abandoned, and made him stay the night. And what happened to Norman was that it was in the middle of a thunderstorm, and he felt that he could hear a goblin like chittering around. Right? He felt that the goblin was all around him in this abandoned house. and he wasn't afraid of the dark. He was afraid of when the lightning would go. He was afraid of the light, because then the goblin would be revealed standing next to him.
Yeah.
And so it's what turned him to darkness, and this is why he wants to turn Peter to darkness. And I think in this issue, that again, this is something that Marvel would never let me write now, I think.
Right.
No way. But it was worth it at the time, and they really did. He again, it's, you know, Norman wants him to kill him, so that he will become a killer and therefore become Norman's heir. And he's like, I'm not doing that.
Well, kind of funny for Norman. It's like Peter technically has killed before, whether he's wanted to or not. It's just so it's not like, oh, you're going to cross that line. It's like, dude, he's now killing Goblin. Of course, that would be a different line to cross than being tricked into punching a spy and killing her.
Right. And so we had these things. I mean, I think it was just like, we did very, very strong character-based stories. And look, you know, you look at that last page and you're like, I mean, it's just beautifully done. It looks really great. It's so beautiful. And you can feel all the pain and the passion inside pages like that. That's what I love to make. And
I love it too.
I miss doing it in some ways, you know.
I know. But yeah, but now let's go back up for a bit for the Sentry. From my understanding, it was you and who was the other person who came up with the Sentry? Who came up with the idea? But like you,
nobody.
Who?
Let's be clear. Nobody did.
Nobody did. Oh, you? No, it was you did. Oh, because I remember reading somewhere on Wiki there was someone else who came up with a suggestion of adding it to have it be. Oh, he used to be in the past and all that.
No,
that was all you. That was all you.
That was all my story. So I know that there have been.
Rich Veitch is the one who claimed it. Rich Veitch is the one who's claimed.
Yeah, I knew Rick from my days at Tundra. Rick's a great artist and a good guy. But the extent of Rick's connection to the Sentry was that I had a story that I'd written with the entire story for it, and I needed a piece of artwork for it. I asked Rick if he would mind drawing a version of the Sentry, because I needed to. You know, this is obviously, 30 plus years before AI, so I couldn't exactly like AI something. So I needed a piece of art so I could pitch it. Right. I asked Rick if he would do a version of the Sentry for me. But in fact, the story that you read right there, that first issue, I'd already written it.
Okay.
So, to be very clear, I'm not quite sure where the thing of Rick being an original creator came from. I don't know where that came from, but, it was simply that I asked Rick to draw a picture of the Sentry. But the Sentry story had existed for probably 2 years before, probably something like that, before I even asked Rick.
Apparently it was on his website. It was on his website that people have archived. So he's claimed credit. Okay. That's why. I'm just saying. Well, I'm just saying from what I'm reading on Wiki. I'm just going off of Wiki. For all I know, Wiki could be wrong.
Well, I'm not mad about it. I'm just telling you what happened. So let me tell you what did happen.
Go ahead.
I originally had gone to Karen Berger at Vertigo, who I did Hellblazer for.
Right.
And I was really, really enamored of a character that they have at DC called the Hour Man. In fact, I would love to write it.
Yes, Hour Man. Yes, Hour Man. Yes.
And so to me, one of the things that was built into the idea of Hour Man is if you took a pill that could make you a superhero for 1 hour, to me, that would be the greatest and most incredible addiction that you could possibly have, right? Yes. And I wanted to write a story about addiction. And so I pitched it to Karen and I said, look, I think it's just a really good way of taking a character, giving him this thing and having him be addicted. So in fact, if you stop on that page right there that you're looking at.
Yep.
So Karen understandably said, the thing in Vertigo is I just don't do superheroes anymore. We stopped it. Vertigo doesn't do that. For example, if Alan were to pitch me Watchmen now, I think I probably wouldn't say yes, because we don't do superheroes. She said, think of a new character, think of something else to do that type of, because it's a great story. Can you think of a way to do it? And so from that conversation about Hour Man, I created the Sentry. And I pitched the Sentry back to her and I said, here's a guy who thinks he may have once have been a superhero, but it's possibly an addiction. It's almost like you can't tell. And my feeling was the last page would be that he would take you'd be so convinced he's not. He says he's putting on the old Sentry suit and he's clearly not super. He's clearly an addict.
Yep.
But then in the last page, he walks out the backyard and walks up into the sky. And now you've got the question, right? So that was the origin of the Sentry. And Karen said, you know, I still think with it being a superhero, I think because he walks up into the sky, it makes it a superhero story, and that's not for us.
Right. And you needed that last bit for the twist.
Yeah, to continue, right? To continue the story. And and so, you know, from that, I started pitching the Sentry, and it got rejected everywhere. And funnily enough, then I did Jay a solid. So Jay, we got to the end of Inhumans, and Marvel wanted us to team up on anything we wanted, basically, almost, you know.
Yeah.
They certainly were pretty, you know, you want to do Avengers, you want to do this, you want to do that. And I said, I really want to do the Sentry that you keep rejecting. And they said, oh, not that stupid thing. Right? But Jay was in with me. He wanted to do it too. And he believed in the story. And we both really did. So after being turned down for quite a number of years, finally, we got to write this story. And then we got to do the story of this forgotten hero, and obviously the rest is history, you know.
Yep, and then Bendis brought him back into it and everything. How did that feel to see that Bendis would then be like, "I want to use him," and after that, now he has not been let go?
Well, my understanding is that, you know, I talked to Brian about it when he did it, and Brian. Brian told me he was having a conversation with Marvel. It sounds like a very typical conversation, actually, one that I've been privy to as well. I've had a couple of these conversations where they sort of say, we haven't got any really good heroes. And Brian's like, what are you talking about? Like, we got the Sentry.
So I had a feeling some of editorial seems to act like that. And it depends on if you have the right writer to say, what do you mean? Of course we do. Or people are like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, we do. And so Brian said, you know, we got the Sentry, for example. That story was really good. Why aren't we using that character? And so he brought the Sentry. And here was the thing. I think perhaps they thought they had a problem, which I don't actually agree that it is a problem. They thought they had a character that's too overpowered for the Marvel Universe, right? And that is true to some extent. Although you still have Thor and you still have Galactus.
Exactly.
So it's not like it, but, you know, he had the power of a million exploding suns. It was crazy. He was the most powerful one of all.
But he's
mentally ill. And,
exactly.
And so his strength is also his weakness. I believe we created a character that would be a very Stan Lee type character.
Yeah. I've always heard that people thought that was a joke, that if I remember Wizard trying to claim, oh, Stan Lee created this long ago, and that was like the gag about it, like this is a lost Stan Lee character that Marvel's bringing up and utilizing, and again, that was the joke.
Well, it wasn't a joke; it was actually a marketing campaign.
Oh, it was.
That's how we did it. Yeah, was to pretend that Stan had written it and that I'd found it. But that's fine, right? It was just fine to do it that way, and so, you know, we created him, and then you know, over in the second book with JR again, I got a chance to really show like what he was. You know, for everything that he did that was good, the Void did something bad. He was duality personified. And remember, you know, he'd stopped being a hero because he knew that if he was a hero, the Void would exist.
Exactly.
Now, I believe that what we created and what I created and what we did at Marvel is such a vibrant character for them, because I really like Clock. I love the Watchtower. I love the Watchdog, little Welsh corgi with a cape on its back, because I just found like animals to be so absurd. The idea that Superman has super dog. And so people would sometimes go, well, it's a Superman ripoff. And I'm like, what? Why does it have to be a negative? It's clearly influenced by Superman. Because I like the idea of the Superman, but it's my version of what a Superman might be, you know,
especially in Marvel. Yeah,
especially in Marvel. And you know, the second series is not one. I mean, yeah, it did well, you know, with me and JR, but it's not one that necessarily people remember having the traction of the first. But to be honest, I feel like it was really hitting its stride in that story, you know. And so there's these funny things like her name is Lindy Lee. Oh, everyone's illiterate.
LL.
You know, Lindy Lee, right? They have to be like Bruce Banner, Robert Reynolds, Lindy Lee, right?
Yep.
And my wife is Melinda. It's based on my wife, right? Lindy. And that's what I call my wife. And, you know, so you have like all of this was real. But that scene that you're even doing there, like that's one of my favorites. It's that she kind of says to him, hey, let's get busy, kind of thing. They're like after dinner, they're like, hey, let's go to the bedroom, And she's like, could you stay as the Sentry?
Oh,
And it's like you asked me to wear lingerie. Could you maybe, like, and he doesn't. So it's all about this like weird thing of like how people have relationships in these types of situations.
Oh, yeah, there's like something like that. Well, are you coming? Sure, lead the way. Oh,
yeah, she didn't. She wasn't as excited, and he's got gravy stain on his shirt. He's not the Sentry
exactly,
and he, he's sort of looking at the gravy stain on his pants or something, right?
Exactly. And it feels like, now, was this intentional to also lean towards some people who believe that Lois and prefer Superman over Clark? Was this meant to be also a nod to that too, or no?
No, not at all. No, it was just me thinking about what relationships would be like if you had these things happening to you.
Exactly.
And I felt that it would be really complicated. And, he that particular scene that you showed is him at dinner with her, and they're in the middle of dinner and they're hanging out, and and then he says, "Can you excuse me for a second?" And he goes away for like 15 seconds, and he comes back.
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, you got a little bit of stuff on you," because he's just saved like a ship from sinking or something.
Exactly.
And he has to. So I just think it was like it's usually my style. It's just like trying to show the human side of it all, I suppose you can say.
Definitely. Now, what's your opinion on the casting recently for Sentry? Do you approve? Do you have no opinion? What's your take on?
Well, I'll tell you this, right? Because some people have already asked me about this. I mean, I got asked a lot of time, are you and Stephen Yeun having a baby? Which is quite so if it ends up being Stephen Yeun,
which I think it is. I think they have confirmed now it is.
Okay. When people complain about this, I got maybe two things that are worth saying about it. His race was never really that important to who the Sentry was, really.
I had a feeling that's what you were going to say. I had a feeling.
I don't think it was that important because that wasn't the story, right? The story was not like, is he an Asian guy or is he a white guy or whatever?
Right.
It was more about like what this person would be like in these situations, right? That's like a fair thing to say. A second thing would be when people are complaining that Stephen Yeun is Korean and this is, race swapping or whatever, a quick reminder that Jay Lee, my co-creator on the Sentry, is also Korean.
Exactly.
So it's not like
I do think part of it is the blonde bombshell is one of his aliases that's been so ingrained into what people think of the nickname for him, like Blue Boy Scout and all that. I think that's part of it as well. Like, unless they have him be blonde, which who knows if they will, I think that's going to be one of the things that could stick in some people. It's like it.
I bet they do. That. I mean, look at K-pop bands. Look at how many of the kids in the K-pop bands are like blonde, right?
I was just saying that they probably will. But if they don't, then it's going to be a case where if they give them long black hair or keep it short black hair, then I think people will be like, where's Sentry?
Well, again, we wrote it.
Okay, I'm playing devil's advocate. I just want to make clear, I'm playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, I'm not really that defensive about it. I mean, I guess the question is, what's my opinion as opposed to anyone else's, yours or someone else's? My opinion is that he was written really much more as a guy struggling with mental health issues. That's what I hope we can do with the film, right?
Yep.
I believe that the Sentry can be for people with mental health issues what Black Panther was for people of color, right?
Yes. I agree with that.
I've been written to by so many people that are like, thank you for creating a Sentry. It means so much to me. I struggle with my mental health. It's great to have my character, et cetera, right? Like, I've heard this so many times and it means a lot to me. And so I think, when people get upset, for example, over him being a Korean actor, I say, well, I don't know that was ever that important to the character. And another thing that might potentially be of use, I don't know if this will come about, but remember that, maybe 6% of the United States population is Asian, but, they're in some ways almost seen as being a sort of an invisible population in ways,
Very true.
A lot of the comments. So here's a guy with a history of being invisible in front of people, right, hiding in plain sight, being right there. You know, maybe there's a connection. What I care about is whether or not this becomes the character that represents the struggle of mental illness that people have to overcome.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope that, and here's the other thing. Here's one thing. I'll be honest. My personal worry is if they're going to have him in with the Thunderbolts, I'm worried the Void might be the dominant villain and end up, and they might play up to that. Now, if they do it right, it could be very good. That's my personal worry. I don't know what they're doing. I have no clue. I'm just saying that's my little worry.
Yeah, let's hope that it goes
on
the way that I hope it will. No.
I hope so too. Now, with your Spider-Man stuff, I gotta mention Peter Parker, Spider-Man 33, one of the best Spider-Man issues. It basically, maybe next year, was the Mets. Having him be a Mets fan and all the stuff with him and Uncle Ben, I just love it. I love it so much. But I'll be honest, for the longest time, I had a bit of a misconception until I reread it. For some reason, I thought he didn't go to that last game. Turns out I reread it like, oh, he did. I don't know why I thought he didn't, but because I think that would have made the tragedy worse, that he didn't go to the game that they won. But no, he did go. They won. And then Uncle Ben died a few days later. But where did the idea for this issue come from?
Okay. It's kind of a good story. It's kind of a long story.
Go ahead. We got all the time.
Okay. So I always write about people, and the first thing you should realize is if you go through the pages of this, you'll see that he's only Spider-Man on maybe one page. It's actually a story about a little boy and his uncle.
Exactly.
Right. So the answer to your question is that I was in Wales, and I had flown over from the States to go visit my grandfather, Bill.
Yep.
And he was dying. He only had a couple of days to live. And it's something that I have to do from time to time with my family because I live 3,000 miles away.
Right.
So I go over to see him before he dies. But you have to understand that what that does is it means that I have to say goodbye to them before they're gone. I had to do the same with my dad. And so it's very hard, it's very hard to see my family. So I go to the old people's home. And at the time I was doing really well. I was very happy and lucky working at Marvel. And I see my grandfather and he was struggling. He basically apparently had waited for me because I was very close to him. And also my Uncle Michael, so that he could talk to Uncle Michael about a few things. So I saw him, say, on a Saturday, and I was flying home on a Sunday. And when I got to the old people's home, he was falling asleep as I would talk to him. He was closing down. You could see my grandfather's body just shutting down.
Right.
And so I tried talking with him. The FA Cup final, because it was a Saturday, the FA Cup final soccer was on and Chelsea was playing, and that's his team. And I said, Granddad, do you want to watch the game? And he said, no, I'm not interested. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, you're finished with it, right? And I couldn't think of a way to connect to him, but I really wanted to. And then I started talking to him about these old wartime songs that he used to sing to me when I was a little kid. He grew up, he was a young man in the Blitz, and he was in the Merchant Navy, and his ship got sunk.
Right.
And he never really spoke about that, but he did like to sing the old wartime songs with me. So he'd sit me on his knee, and we'd all sing these little songs. So I started singing one, and he sings it with me. It's ingrained. It's in his brain. And so we're singing this little song. And I look around, and I realize that there's this creepy little noise. And I look around, and every old person, all his peers, they are all singing the same song. There was an old lady with complete dementia who had completely gone. She was looking out the window, possibly waiting for someone to come, and she couldn't help but mouth the words. She was singing the same song. And I realized, wow, like you connect to people, so much through Thanksgiving or Christmas or ritual or sports or a song or something like that. That's how you connect to people.
Yeah.
And so I got on the plane, and the day that my Uncle Michael went to go see him on Sunday, I got on the plane. Uncle Michael saw him. I began to take off, and I kind of knew he was gone, And so I wrote this story on the plane. It was about connecting to Granddad through the song, and in this case, it's Peter connecting to his Uncle Ben through the Mets. And finally, it doesn't always end sunny. I mean, finally, you know, the Mets always lose. That bit, by the way, that scene that you've got is actually genuinely funny.
Oh yeah, I love that with the clunk and then we'll do some damage control. No problemo.
So that is actually, and that came from a conversation I had with Joe Quesada. If you want to stay on that page for a second.
Yep,
So
go ahead.
Joe and I were talking about this story, and I'd originally somewhat thought it could be the Red Sox because they never win, right? Mm-hmm. But he's like, yeah, from New York, I don't think so. Make him a Mets fan. I'm like, yeah, that's cool because I don't really care.
Right.
And Joe's a big Mets fan, right?
Right.
So we're watching this, and he said that he was at a game, and someone hit a line drive, and it went, you know, it didn't go in play. And it hit some guy who was on his cell phone. So this guy was like this just self-important kind of dude. He's on his cell phone. And all of a sudden the ball comes out of nowhere, smashes into this guy, and he goes down, right? And the phone suspends in midair like a cartoon and just falls. And the whole crowd thought it was hilarious because this guy was on his phone. And so they kept replaying it, and the crowd was cheering the whole time. Mm-hmm. And we were laughing and joking about it. I said, what if he woke up and Mr. Met was standing over him, right?
Like, hey there, buddy, you okay?
So we actually did that scene. We thought that was really funny. So we did that scene where Mr. Met, like, he wakes up from being knocked out, and Mr. Met's all over him, and he doesn't know what's happening.
And I just love it how Peter is just like, oh, geez.
Yeah, oh boy. Yeah.
He's never going to forget that. He's never going to forget. Yep, there's one of the few times where he's Spidey.
He's just, in fact, there's a flashback. So in the end, you know, he's 14 years old, and 15 maybe, and he's growing apart from his uncle, and his uncle wants to go, but they always lose, and he's like, I don't want to go. And then his aunt kind of tells him off, and he's like, okay, got it. But he just doesn't want to be there. He's a typical teenager, and they're growing apart. And of course, in this story, for the very first time, they win. And
I love it. Ben doesn't even have to say a word. He doesn't have to say a word.
You don't have to say a word, and they're connected. And they realize all these times they've watched the Mets together, this is the first time they've ever won. And in the end, like it says, you know, they won. They'd finally won, and 3 days later, he was dead. And I had just literally experienced it with my grandfather. So,
and here's something I always saw. I always would, if I ever do with Spider-Man stuff, I would do an homage to this, you know, reference to this, but I would have it be that someone, maybe he has a girlfriend, maybe someone it'd be a girlfriend who doesn't know his past, who would think, oh, he got a ticket for me, and then Peter Beck, no, maybe another game, not this one.
Not this one, yeah, not this one.
Yeah, but that would be my reference to it, because I feel like that's a story that's always going to stay with me, is this story, because it's just so simple, and the issues you've done with Mark Buckingham were some of the best, including the final issue you had done. Number 27. You know, just having that whole play and everything was also a great issue. And
well, we did something in that book that no one had ever done before, and I think that we really had this thing that I thought meant a ton, because you have to understand that I only write about things that I understand or know. I don't really read a lot of comics. I don't watch a lot of TV.
Right.
And so this is my life I'm writing here. And understand that I didn't really have my dad left when I was 5, you know? And so, so this story is what I think really happened with Peter Parker. I think that, you know, he went to go with his aunt and uncle, who were like grandparents, when he was very young, but that doesn't mean to say he didn't have parents, right?
Yep. Oh, Calvin and Hobbes like snowmen.
We totally cribbed it off Calvin and Hobbes.
Especially that one. The one was like, ah! Right. You pair of twits.
Yeah. And so, you know, this story was very much about, he goes back after the very first issue that Mark and I did. He goes back to the same place to talk to Uncle Ben. And he tells Ben, or Ben tells him, don't you realize, you know, you weren't doing this for me.
Yeah.
You think you were. But the reason that you did this, all of these tragedies, all this difficulty, he says, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And Ben says, look, you know, you didn't do this for me. You did it for them.
Exactly.
And he doesn't realize, even he doesn't know that, of course, he did it for his mom and dad, because he was in the school play, And the only memory he has of them, or one of the few memories he has, is that his mom and dad came to the school play, and he was supposed to be a spider, and he got on stage and he froze.
Exactly. I thought I'll warm up the car. Just this whole, yeah. I
And
just
so
love that.
Ben says to him,
It was
all of
always for your
this,
parents.
everything you do is all because you want to show them.
Exactly. And it feels that makes so much sense. And again, just this moment here, it was a great way of ending it. And then, of course, you pair of twits. So I'm assuming that Peter did that all on his own.
Yeah, he did it all by himself. Yeah.
I love that. I just love that. And yeah, and again, it was just a great
And
send off.
it was the final curtain. And if you look in the back of the thing, if you just look behind Mysterio right there, there's me and Tom and Mark.
Yep. I see that. Yeah. I see that. And also another issue that really stand up was the first arc of your Spectacular one was Venom. Yeah. With him with the cancer and everything. That's also been a redefining stuff for a character. Like, how was it coming up with that? Like, I mean, were you assigned to do Venom, or was it an idea you had?
Yeah, that was the first time that they assigned me. Up to that point, all the way up to that point, they just let me write whatever I wanted. And they said to me, "Can you do a Venom story, and can it be 5 issues?" And I went, "Okay." And so we did this Venom story, but we came up with something which I liked. It was that Eddie Brock had this difficult thing that was attached to him.
Yep.
And it was a symbiotic kind of relationship with this alien. But what the alien had done was it was feeding off of him. It was feeding off of the adrenaline that he secretes. And so adrenal, certain types of cancer will actually secrete adrenaline.
Right.
And so the alien was like taking him up to the top of a building and throwing him off. And then he plunged to his death. But just before he'd hit his death, it would save him. And he'd be screaming and terrified, and it would be feeding off of the adrenaline that he secreted. But that the alien had tasted Peter's adrenaline, and that was more palatable to it, and it wanted him.
Right. But it was accepting Eddie for that. Which I gotta say, that's one thing I prefer writers who remind us that the relationship between Eddie and Venom is not a good one.
It's not a good one.
It's not. And I think Donny Cates even makes it very clear during his run. It's always going to be a toxic relationship. Yeah. Always.
Yeah, because it's something that's feeding off him, you know.
Exactly.
And so and I think that that this was just like visually it was really cool, the story, and we definitely, Umberto and I really kind of hit a stride with some of these books that we did. Exactly,
and that was a great one. But now, Wolverine Origins. From what I understand, the origin behind Origins was that basically Fox had told Marvel, either you come up with an origin or we're going to do our own eventually because Wolverine's that popular. And Marvel decided we better come up with one. Otherwise, they're going to do it and we're going to be stuck with it. Is that true? Like that's the reason why they finally pulled the trigger.
Yeah, I remember having the conversation with Joe where he said, we feel that if we don't do the origin at this point, they will come up with one that we don't like. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I do remember that, but I think that ours was very removed from anything they were going to do, Yeah.
Right. Well, obviously, I'm just saying that's what caused them to pull the trigger on it,
Origin was really simple, right, Robert? Because ultimately, all we did was say what his name is. We said where he was born. We said kind of when he was born. And we came up, we just...
A checklist.
I had one idea that I don't do a lot of like continuity stuff very much because it's not my style. But I had one that I was pretty proud of that came out of this, which is the reason he forgot was because he sort of had a really bad experience with PTSD. Yep. He accidentally, does something terrible. And
then his mind heals it.
And his mind heals it. So he papers over the cracks of what he had. So that's why he can't remember where he came from. That's it. And it was a really, really simple and elegant solution to a problem that they had, which they didn't know why he'd forgotten. They never knew it.
Exactly. And I gotta say, now, I mean, well, I'll say this. I've seen some stories where it feels like there's a checklist being, marked up, like he likes redheads, roads, he's done this and that. But it felt here like, even if that was that might creep in my mind sometimes, like, oh, this is where you learned Bub. You still told a great story that explained all of it. It's like,
Yeah, because
yeah,
the question is, we are all facing. If you want to ask the question, where does someone come from? Then you always ask
yeah,
the question of nature versus nurture. In other words, how much influence did your parents have on you, and how much influence did your genetics have on you, right?
exactly.
And so, elements of things that he had seen, like the kindness of his father against the tyranny of his grandfather,
Hmm.
um, the
Logan and Dog.
yeah, the cruelty of people. Um, um, all of these things, how cruel people are.
And Smitty was definitely one of his biggest
And
influences.
Smitty was clearly the guy that taught him bub and cage fighting and this stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
like it was important to him, and so who he became.
I did love the twist. You
Yeah,
think it was going to be Dog. You throughout most of this, you keep thinking Dog is Wolverine, and then you find out it's James, because like you basically had to make it clear, like John is and James is sickly. He's very sick. He's very ill. But look at and everything about it, and Andy kept drawing Dog so much like Logan, but then when we see him as a grown man, he looks more like Sabretooth.
that's right. Well, if you go back just one bit, actually, if you just go back to the previous issue, there's something that's worth looking at.
Hold on. Let me go to it. Oh, which page?
The last pages, the last couple of pages, I think.
Oh,
yeah, so you see that page right there.
this one?
The other one, the next one. So one thing that people have probably worked out at this point, talking to you, was that
Mm-hmm.
everything that I write is about me,
Mm-hmm.
And so
Ooh.
when my dad left when I was a little kid, I was 5, and
Mm-hmm.
we lived on a farm
Mm-hmm.
where the farmhouse was up the top of the hill,
Right.
and we were the kids at the bottom. So that's what my brother and I grew up like.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no money for electricity.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy. My mum, single mother,
Mm-hmm.
trying to raise 2 little boys in that environment.
Right.
So it's interesting when people sort of look at how stories come about, and it's like, well, that story I wrote about the farmhouse on the hill, or this
Mm-hmm.
house on the hill that you look up and you see the lights blazing and you got nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my brother and I grew up like. And
Oh.
it's pretty interesting when people have all these theories about it. You're like, well, at least Richard and I, my brother, like, we know different. It's about how we grew up. And so
Right.
a lot of this, growing up on a farm, having deprivation, all of that stuff was stuff that I could pull from how I'd been raised. I have had a very interesting life, and so
Mm-hmm.
because of that, it allows me to pull from it.
Now, who's that on the top? I mean, is this after the beating, and that's either Logan or Dog, or who's that supposed to be on?
That's Dog. That's
That's
Dog.
Dog.
You know,
After the beating. After the
after
beating.
the beating, he looks up at the thing and wishes he could have the warmth of the house up top. I know there are plenty of times when we'd be freezing cold down the bottom of the hill,
Mm-hmm.
and no electricity or whatever, and just go like, God, I wish, because we were allowed to play with the farmers' children, which I think is in
Mm-hmm.
here, but we weren't allowed to go.
Oh yeah.
We weren't allowed to go to their birthday parties.
Mm-hmm. Right. Completely understandable. But yeah, again, throughout all this, I went over this with friends of mine and it'll be an upcoming video. I'll be sure to tag you in when we get to it, of going over Origins. And we both agreed, all 3 of us agreed, it was a great story. It's called Pro Teacher Soup. I go over the book, sometimes read most of the dialogue and get their reactions from it, and they adored it. They loved it. But yeah, now a story that I feel so underrated, and okay, come on, load up, is Wolverine: The End. I really liked it. It's basically, you're the man who gave the answers, so let's leave him with some questions. And if I recall hearing right, wasn't that the whole point? Was basically, you gave all the answers, but Wolverine should always have more questions by the end.
Yeah, the idea being that I think when we answered 2 or 3 questions about him, where was he born, why did he grow up that way, who were his parents, that kind of stuff, that by answering those few questions, we raised 1,000 more, and we did.
Exactly.
Because they used the origin of Wolverine to do Wolverine Origins for years, right?
Yep. He's still James Howlett. He's still James Howlett now.
Yeah, and so in the end, what they asked me to do, and I probably didn't follow the mandate very well, they asked me to write the last story of Wolverine.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wanted to write the definitive story of Wolverine. In other words,
Right.
what do I have to say, right?
Which will be him never getting any more answers. Is that correct?
In some ways, it's this. It's and I don't mean to be presumptuous here. I'm just.
Right,
there are some things that happen to us in our past, right? Challenges.
Yep.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, I agree.
You know, my brother and I had quite a few. As
I've had some. I think a lot of people have.
We all have them, right? That's why I think the Sentry is important. That's why I think these types of stories are important, and we all have these challenges that are difficult for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what you begin to realize over time, especially because I'm a writer, right, is that you may not necessarily get to reconcile all those problems, right? You don't necessarily get to go back in the past and challenge someone that treated you badly, or find the solution to things, or find the answer to something that you didn't know, right? You may have to deal with it without knowing these things. And so really what Wolverine in the end was about was that I believe it was a metaphor in some ways. His body had been taken to pieces. It was, in a sense, it was a metaphor for rape. Right, he had been basically he'd had metal put in his body without his consent, if you see what I mean, right?
Yep.
And so he goes back to take the people who did this to him, right?
Yep.
He wants to go find Weapon X. He wants to take him down. After all these years, he thinks he's going to get there, and when he gets there,
it's already gone.
There's nothing to find. They've been gone for 50 years. They don't exist anymore.
And as his brother put it, they cashed their pension checks and shut the whole thing down.
You don't get to sometimes confront your rapist, you know. In that sense, I don't want to be crass about it because it's not a story of rape particularly.
Right. I get the metaphor.
But it's about not being able to go back in the past and like confront, you know. But what he does find out in all of this is that yes, there was a brother. And he'd always believed that there might be.
Yep.
And there was a clue in the origin story because his mother had been
the clause.
Right, yeah.
Oh, it was okay. So, well, it wasn't rape because they seem to imply it was an affair when his brother was talking. Eventually explains, and he says, "I saw Mother and Logan," you know, and all that.
But that he was a progeny of, you know, of the mom who probably had a genetic background, and that slash across her was probably his brother, his older brother. Yeah.
Oh, which is exactly what you show in this story.
Go back really 2 pages, right? I like wordplay. He finds wine lover, right? That's his thing because
I bet he said, like, it's the one thing. It's not me. It has nothing to do with me. And it's like, yeah, wine. He doesn't care for wine. So it's like, you sly old
but guess what? It's an anagram of Wolverine. Wine lover. Wine lover.
I love certain bits here. Like, I love, like, this woman here is basically saying, you think you know Japan and you don't. And like, but I remember your great-grandfather saying that to me. I love when Wolverine can pull out little things like that. He's just like,
that's funny. Yeah, I like that kind of thing. But he's a great character, and we had a chance to talk about what more there could be for him. So I didn't do the end of him. I did not do the bit where he dies. I did the bit where he gets his final answer to things, and
exactly, or his final chance at answers. Anyway,
yeah.
Now I would say I did like this bit of him having glasses. We never see him again. Just that one bit.
Yeah.
But like I said, was John was the thing I love most about this story. Is that just this whole idea of like he was there the whole time, always observing it and everything. And I just love how by the end, now, in my opinion, I mean, I do love the other, I do enjoy the other two issues, but to be honest, it almost feels like you could have ended up right when he knocked his brother off the cliff, where he's denying answers.
Yeah. It depends, you know. I mean, I think that
oh no, I'm not saying the other issues were bad. I'm just saying you could have ended there. That's what I say.
You could have ended it there. That's true. And I think that what I wanted to say though was that once he comes to understand all of these things, all of them,
exactly,
he realizes that there's nothing that he could have done. And so the question about what he can now do is really up to him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, just everything here was John. Well, of course, that's an issue 4 when we get to that. But again, like I said, it answers some of the questions. Like, why did his mother say, no, not again? Where did she get the scar? What happened to the brother? Why did the old man seem to know something else? Like, did you always have this in your mind that this was that secret backstory, or was that just something?
Yeah, of course, because you don't write a story without having the backstory.
Right.
Sure.
Right. But of course, since it is at the end, it's not the official explanations in the Marvel universe, unfortunately. At least as far as the editorial's been treating it, I mean.
Yeah, that's fine. It's okay.
Yeah. But again, this moment here, these moments here was what I love the most about this. Again, the filling in the gaps. Now, was John, and also from Logan, or was that just James and John was still the son of his father?
I don't need to say the answer to that, right? Because I've always invited people to work out their own ideas behind it. I think it's much more fun for everybody, you know?
In my mind, I always thought that James was the affair and John Jr. was still the proper son. That's how I saw it as. So
if so, then the genetics lie with the mother.
Yeah, the genetics lie with the mother. I mean, I know the movies say, "Oh, it's all from the dad's side." Nah, in my opinion.
Or maybe they were both product of an affair.
Exactly, but yeah, the old man was an interesting character too. Just this whole this grumbly. Then at the very end, he's like, "I regret everything." Yeah. But now eventually, then you would do Generation M, Civil War Frontline, and World War Hulk Frontlines, where you gave us Sally Floyd. Now, talk about an interesting character that, unfortunately, what she did at the end of Civil War, I know you made fun of it in the World War Hulk Frontlines, but did you ever expect that blow up from her, the way she lashed out at Cap?
I think what is really interesting about that is that people like to find things that they can be, I'm sure you probably see this on your YouTube channel and everything, right?
Yep.
People would much rather talk about the negative, but kind of ignore the positive.
I hate that.
So here's the thing that she did, and here's the thing that people don't realize. She begins this is the mandate that Marvel gave us for Civil War.
Right.
They could already see, and you have to go back to when we did Civil War. I can't remember which year it is, but I bet you it's like 2005, 2006.
2006 or so, yeah. Right.
So back in those days, we were just beginning to get what we now have politically, right? If you see what's happening online, people arguing about Republican, Democrat, right, all of this stuff, right? And it's toxic and awful.
Oh,
it's really hard to face. I don't know anyone that enjoys it.
Nope, I don't. I hate it. I hate it.
I hate it too. I'm a kid of the punk era, right? So I don't like politics at all. Politics is bullshit. Quick tip, everyone. It's a self-enrichment scam for politics. It's only to make themselves rich. It has nothing to do with you. I like those though. Those are great.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. You poked fun of it. I don't know anything. When's the last time you posted on YouTube?
Yeah. Right. So what happened with Sally Floyd was that they said, you have to make it even. We can already see that people are seeing that Iron Man is the Republicans and Captain America is Democrats. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. What?
But it was true. The Republican people were kind of headed towards Iron Man, and this was happening. And it was the beginning of this toxic crap that you see. And so Marvel asked us to be even-handed. And I said, not a problem for me because I don't care about politics at all. Right. But I tell you what, I don't think you can do a story with just constantly in the middle. So what I did was I had her be very left-wing. And she conducts herself a certain way, assuming certain things that are happening, right?
Right.
In the middle of the story, she gets a little bit of an education that there are other ways to think, right?
Exactly.
In other words, we gave the perspective of the Republican side and the registration side in my story. So constant moaning, she's a liberal. Jenkins is a crazy liberal. And I'm like, I don't do politics. But what you're saying is, I wrote her as a character that antagonizes you. I must be a halfway decent writer. Exactly. I don't do her politics. I don't care about her in politics. I don't do politics, right? But anyway, so they screamed and they carried on. They attributed it to me and my personal political beliefs. Now, in the middle of it, she arrives in two places. One is that she runs into a character that was very much like John McCain used to be like a Republican guy that was a prisoner of war, very much loved his country, and he kind of teaches her a bit of a lesson, right?
Yep.
He does. She's been so ingrained in speaking about the anti-registration league, the Captain America thing. She's been fully in that as she's been dealing with the Civil War, that she loses sight of the fact that maybe she has her own set of biases and maybe she needs to learn a little bit more from it. Right. So what nobody admitted, like loads of people refused to admit, is that in the end, she confronts Iron Man.
Yep. I was just realizes, that.
She tells him, I know what you did. What you have done is the most selfless and brave thing that you could do. Because I thought I was investigating you sending money to yourself, like enriching yourself from all of this. But what Iron Man had done was very secretly take a bunch of the money that was and channel it to a pension fund for superheroes so that they and their families could be protected for the rest of their lives, right? Like a VA fund. Yeah. And she had finally found out after all of this trying to take Iron Man down, she'd done a job and she realized, I was wrong about you. You are a patriot and you're trying to help these people, right?
Yep.
Not a word from the people that had screamed at me about being They didn't say a word, and no one, and I'm like, so at one point she has this kind of diatribe about at Captain America. She kind of yells at him and she says, look, just to be clear, you're living in the past. Like the America that you're fighting for is baseball and apple pie, but that's not America.
Exactly.
America's so many more things. And I realized that. And the fans got so mad at me.
I know.
And again, just to be clear, she's not me. She is a character. No. What can you do?
Yep. But yeah, of course. But again, you made fun of it very well. Just having it be, she's responsible for so much horrible crap.
I love the fact that she makes Tony Stark drink alcohol. That was one of the things that she did. She meets her creator. That's a good one. She meets, like Sentry meets his creator. So if you go to the previous page, she actually meets me.
Yep. I hate you.
She yells at me.
I love that. But I gotta say, my favorite issue has to be of all the front lines, has to be the stuff with her and Jonah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my favorite one because just this whole notion of like him being like, hey, I know exactly what you're doing. You're right. I sent you the money. I did all this.
He funded them. And now she gets a wake-up call again. She keeps getting these wake-up calls like, my God, this guy funded us. And, he's supposed to be our competitor, and I'm supposed to hate him, and he's the one that's put the money behind us. Yeah.
And he's like, are you going to tell Phil? Of course not. Not Phil, Ben. Ben, you going to tell Ben? Hell no.
Yep.
And if even Robbie, again, I love when Jonah is shown to be that much smarter. I hate it when he's all like, I'm going to go to any other side against Spider-Man just because I hate Spidey, which that's one of my downsides with the Insomniac games. They overdo that, where it's like, he's cheering on a Carnage cult that's doing riots just because Spidey's stopping them. It's like, no, Jonah would never do that. Jonah would begrudge you, be like, these people are horrible. These are wrong. Yes, Spider-Man stopped them. That doesn't mean Spider-Man's a good guy. That's what Jonah would do.
Right, and you don't get to be the top of a publishing thing like that by being stupid, And the other thing I will say, I definitely want to point this out, is that I've been so lucky. Worked Jay Lee, Sean Phillips, Mark Buckingham. I've worked with everybody, and this guy,
Raymond Box, I believe.
Raymond Box, is by far my favorite person, and I love all of them so much, right? But Ramon, the way that he draws my stories is exactly the way that I want them to be. I get them back every time, and I'm like, this is exactly what I wrote.
I love that. Like, I do it. Now prove me wrong. Again, this is a Jonah that I prefer because one, he reminds me a lot of Perry White, a proper Perry White. Because I always feel like Jonah and Perry are much more alike. It's just that so many people keep Perry on the straight and narrow, and then they flanderize Jonah because, funny Jonah.
So sometimes when you do my job, right, you get, I don't deal with pride so much, but you can be proud of some things. That section that you got right there up on screen is something that I'm very proud of, because the way that they're talking to her, they sort of say like, look, this is how he would do it, right? He's kind of horrible. Jonah's still horrible, right? But he says, you know, now Ben's never going to, you know, Robbie says, like, Ben's not going to know that we funded you if you don't tell him. So
he's happier.
Jonah says, my guess is you won't be able to because you're a drunk and you screw people's lives up. That's what you do. Go ahead and prove me wrong. And she's like, wow, I got a wake-up call and a lesson from Jonah Jameson, which is great.
Exactly. And I just love that. And again, the fact that I look back at with Sally, I feel so bad for her. She loses her kid, and then months after she loses him, M-Day happens. It's like, now, you know what I think would be a cruel irony for that is? Her kid wasn't one of those that was, her kid ended up being one of the 198 and still died. That would have been the twist of the night.
The twist, yeah. But that story again is one that I'm really proud of. What a sad story that was. You know, I love Generation M. That was Ramon.
Yeah, that was also Ramon. Yeah, and believe it or not, someone did utilize her during Secret Empire, where she's interviewing Cap, and they basically tell her, you can ask him anything, any question that's on the table, except for Las Vegas. She still says Las Vegas at the very end and gets arrested.
Yeah.
I'm like, so that is so. They got her. That's not what she would do. She would save it until the very end. Be like, what about Las Vegas?
Yeah. Yep.
That's the last time we've seen her. But yeah, exactly. Now, what about the stuff with Speedball becoming Penance? You're the one who put him in the armor, if I recall, correct?
Yeah. You know, we won. If you can see up here, this thing right there is it's a Prism Award. It's a government-sponsored award for accurate portrayal of mental health issues, which is meaningful to me with having a number of my family members deal with that kind of stuff. And so I've written about it a lot, right? And this was about post-traumatic stress disorder, and it was about I have had so many people come to me about this Penance story and say, man, like what we did was so big. Now, where this came from, it's going to piss people off.
All right. Go ahead.
I was walking, Joe Quesada and I were at his apartment, his place in New York. And Joe says, we're going to meet Garth Ennis for a beer. We got 4 blocks. Can you do anything with Speedball? Pitch me. And within 1 block, I had pitched him this story. and the craziest part, right, was he said, do you want to do anything with Speedball? And as is typical of me, I said, yeah, probably. Who's Speedball? I have no idea who it is. I don't know much about comics, right? And
right.
And so he tells me who Speedball is, and I said, oh, yeah, well, cool. You know, we could do this, and this. And I pitched him this story by the time we got to the pub with Garth, and then we drank, and I remembered it, frankly. Which was lucky because sometimes when you drink with Garth, you don't remember much.
Right.
It was about PTSD, and it was about obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was about a guy who couldn't take back something that had happened, even though it's a mistake that he made, but the effects of the mistake are so much more than he thought they would be.
Exactly.
And so now he's dealing with a lot of pain. And so what he does, and I thought this was, this again was probably quite a good idea that I'm proud of, is that he builds a suit. His powers are now derived from pain. He can only enact them if he's in pain. So he builds a suit with needles inside it. And when he throws a punch or gets hit, the pain is so much that it enacts his powers, but it's obviously hurting him. He's at a cost, right? It's punishing himself for what happened. But there's significance to the amount. Like every single needle inside there represents somebody who died in the events of the Civil War because of what he did.
Exactly.
And you think, okay, that's why he's beating himself up. And then in the end of the story, you find out why he built the suit. Exactly. It wasn't to hurt him. It was to hurt somebody else.
Exactly. Again, I really enjoyed that. Also, two other Marvel stories. One of the attempts at bringing in Captain Marvel back. Did you know that this was never going to last, or did you go in assuming it would last?
No, I had the best story to actually do it that would have really... I'm disappointed in that one because Marvel actually really didn't quite do what they were going to do.
And then they revealed he was a Skrull in secret.
That wasn't the plan for it. That was not the plan. So I tell you, it might be because they were making a different Captain Marvel, but...
Yep. I love the idea. It's basically he's plucked out time. He's going to have to go back eventually. Otherwise,
So the story I wrote the story I wrote was that he's plucked out of his time,
Mm-hmm.
and he has to go back to die of cancer.
Exactly.
So he now knows, and the act of heroism that he produces is to save everybody in the future, and then still have to go back and never tell a soul.
I love that. I was waiting forward to that.
So that was the series that I was going to write. I was going to write that series, and all of a sudden they were like, "We don't want to do that series. We want to make him a Scott." I think they just realized they didn't want to do him, but that was tough for me because I've had what I thought was a really beautiful story. And
I love that. I love that idea. I thought that was a great idea. But then there's also the Son of Hulk. Doing that arc. Yeah. Were you given any steps of what to do, or were you given free reign to handle with Hero?
I can't quite remember. I think that we were given some things that tied into World War Hulk and some other stuff and all that. Yeah, but eventually it was really just kind of like building out the world and maybe seeing what the Son of Hulk could be like in a sense, And so it was very otherworldly. And I suppose in hindsight, I look at that otherworldly stuff and I'm like, sometimes you hit, sometimes you don't. I like it well enough, but it wasn't necessarily for me because I'd much rather do like straightforward stories about people,
Yeah, true. But I would say Greg Pak really did play off with a lot of stuff you built off of. I don't know if you followed up on it, but yeah, Hero eventually became such a tragic character that he basically ended up dooming himself by the end because of the past he had started here. And it was a very good story because he kept playing off, like he kept convincing himself, especially, I don't know if this was your intent, but Greg Pak revealed when Sierra appears before him, it wasn't really Sierra. He had convinced himself it was her. It was basically she was there. She did burn him, but her words, she never spoke, is what he revealed. That she never spoke. That it was his mind convincing himself that she was giving him praise. But it's like, why is she giving him praise if she's burning him?
Yeah. No, I didn't know about that, but I always think it's fair game. Like what anyone else does with this stuff is really cool,
Well, what was your intent? Was your intent that this was her saying this? Because I was curious, like, why say this and still burn him?
Yeah, it's difficult to say, right? Like, the way I feel about it is more like what's the best way to put it? Like I don't mind what anyone else does with it. If they want to interpret it or make a new story with it, great. I know what I did, right? And so what I did worked when I did it, but it doesn't really matter what they did after me. I have an opinion like you do, right?
Right, exactly.
We all have opinions about these things, so it's kind of like, yeah, cool. That's great. Sounds good.
All right, just curious on that.
Yeah.
Again, I thought that was a good short arc that really did set him down a dark path, which I liked. Because hey, he's a son of a Hulk. He's going to go down a dark path.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy, is it?
Yeah. But so yeah. Now of course, back we had at least a few DC books ago before we are wrapped up. When you were brought over for DC to do the New 52 with Deadman and everything. How did that come about?
That was really strange. That was one where I hadn't worked for DC in a long time. And it is a strange thing. You probably remember that, I kind of had a bit to say about the way that creators were being treated at the time.
Yep.
And because, at that point, I became an elder statesman in this business. Of
course.
How did I get old, man? That sucks, But I've been doing it for a long time. And so the way it came about was that they came to me and they asked me if I would be interested in doing, 2 of the books in the New 52.
Yep. One was Deadman and the other one was Dark Knight. David Finch clearly needed a writer to get him going because when they had him just take all on his own, oh boy, the delays on that book.
Yeah. And so what I felt was happening at that point was that me going to say work at DC created a problem for me at Marvel, but I'm like, why? I don't get it. We're not on pensions, we're not on staff, we're not on payroll. It should be. Right. It's very difficult for me to accept that maybe creators are used, or at the time this was happening, creators might be used as like bargaining chips between two companies. Right. Seems unfair.
Yeah. Right. I do seem to recall Joe and Dio were really at each other by that point. That
they had a lot of animosity towards each other, and so why that shouldn't be anything that affects my life.
Agreed.
I'm just trying to earn a living.
exactly.
write good stories. And I felt that was really challenging. So it made things difficult for me. But essentially, apart from that, they asked me to come over and do it. And so I knew what to do. I knew like how to write the stories that I wanted to write. And I kind of understood what I could do with Dead Man, that ultimately I felt that the problem with the character was that he didn't have enough stuck to him. Like there wasn't something that would make him vulnerable. It was missing, right?
Right.
And so what I made stick to him was that he was psychically attached to all the people he'd ever inhabited.
Nice.
And at that point, he could not help them, or he couldn't, like, basically he had to resolve this. He had to unattach them to free them, but there was something missing. He had to find a way to free all of these people that he had been. And so that became at least, and so in that last one there, you see they're all with him. They're every single one behind him, and he's trying to release them. I mean, that gives him a conceit, a little bit like we did with the Hulk, right? We gave him Lou Gehrig's disease. At least he now has something that will release him. So it's pretty cool. And, I came over and did some DC. It had been a long time since I did any DC. I think the Dead Man story worked out great. I think that Dark Knight was...
Oh, by the way, White Rabbit has been written again. And I'm curious. Yeah. And I like that. I'm so glad because White Rabbit's always just been we're just going to draw her because she looks sexy. I'm glad that someone's actually writing her for once.
Yeah, she had something that was worth having. She was an interesting character, so but she looks good, right? So.
Oh yeah, she looks good. But I just like the idea that this lady that Bruce was dating, and again, this whole idea that she splits in two and then remerges together, and it's like, oh, that's one way of getting around the hall. She doesn't have to run off to change.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. She's in two places at once. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I loved doing it.
And then you did the Infected and the Year of the Villain one shot.
Yeah, I did it a couple over the years, but understand I live in Atlanta. There's a lot of film and television here,
which leads me to want to ask about some of your other work outside of comics. Like we went over your Radical stuff. You brought up Prototype. I've been replaying that, and besides trying to get it working properly on my modern computer, that's still a pain in the ass. The idea behind, because you only worked on the first one, not the second one.
Right. Yeah.
Where did the idea for Prototype come from?
It's pretty interesting. If you look at the game mechanic, for one thing, it's really the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction.
It's the exact same thing.
Well, I would say this. Where did it come from? Well, half of the characters that are named in the story are literally like friends of mine in my phone.
Right.
So I imagine you can pretty much guess where it came from, right?
Right.
It came from my head, where a lot of things come from.
Well, obviously. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about just this whole, the genesis of the game. This whole, he has these sharp stuff and everything. Was that just because they just wanted to do something like Hulk, but obviously without the IP, or?
Yeah, it was almost like that, yeah. It was almost like that. Yeah, the viral thing, I think, was something that they liked. And, there was lots of different...
I like Venom.
Sort of fusing together. It was almost like Venom and the Hulk and all these kind of things. It had a lot of legs. And I think that my what's kind of funny is this, right? Have you ever played a video game called Spec Ops: The Line?
Yes, love that game. Great story.
I wrote on that story before it was published, and so this whole thing about PTSD and the game mechanic. I've been involved in a lot of games that have done a lot of stuff that have changed a lot of things. And so but I'm not credited on that game,
Yeah. I was just realizing that. I was just like, wait a second. But then you say that. It's like, that's like.
That happens to me a lot, right? A lot of people want me. And then the question is, do they pay for it? And then sometimes they just take the pieces, right? And that's tough sometimes. But what I would say is, I'm very lucky. I make a lot of stuff. A lot of people, and I think that over time, I've developed this white hair. I've got gray hair now because I'm a veteran, but I've learned a certain type of techniques of storytelling that fit me, and they seem to work, right? And so I've made a lot of money for a lot of people over time. And my concern has never been about the money. It's always been about
right, of course.
You know, what can we make that's great, and why are we not making great things? You know, making great things in a comic, you can either make a mediocre, boring one, or you can make a good one, and it costs you the same amount of money.
Right.
So make good ones.
Exactly.
Right? And I just saw this argument. I don't know much always about what's going on in comics because I'm busy across different media. But what I would say is I hear a lot that people are dissatisfied with comics as they are right now.
I'm torn one way or the other. With me personally, DC is more my place. Marvel, they're starting to get me back. But for the longest time, it felt like I had a summer home at Marvel. That's how I phrased it. I have a summer home at Marvel, but I live at DC. But now it's starting to feel like things are starting to get better. There was that point where it just felt like you had creators who wanted to be antagonistic to fans. Now, there have been asshole fans too. It goes both ways. But, just sometimes it feels like the writing wasn't there for some books.
Because I think that's easily solvable by, I don't know, writing it, just write a good book, draw a good book, come on, right?
Exactly.
It's still rocket science, and it feels sometimes like very formulaic and very homogenized form of entertainment.
Exactly.
Same is true of video games sometimes, same is true of film, television. And so I can't do that. I just don't have the ability to do that.
Exactly.
And I want to do that,
Yeah, I completely understand. And that's why, and it feels like hearing you talk, again, some of the ideas you come up with, I feel like there's some writers out there, and I'm not naming names, I'm just saying in general from what I've seen, some writers who want to put in their own message, and that's all they're focusing on. And you have editorial that enables it. And I feel like that's sometimes the problem. Sometimes editorial enables people to do something that you shouldn't be allowing in the books just because either they're lazy, they're good friends, who knows what. And that's been my problem with Marvel, but DC, I feel, has had a tighter rein on their editorial to say, stay on track. Stay on track.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I don't live inside it very much anymore.
I know. I wasn't asking a question. I was just giving my opinion.
Yeah, your opinion is as good as anyone's, right? Because everyone's opinion is important.
Exactly.
That's why I think it's really interesting that people will ask me, well, how do I feel about how the Sentry's been treated or whatever? And I'm like, look, everyone has their opinion about things, and so everyone's opinion is equal. Mine is not more important than anyone else's.
Exactly. Oh, by the way, I know you came back. I didn't have it load up. The Sentry Fallen Sun story. How was it writing that, the aftermath and all that? And where did the idea about Rogue, he was one of the few people she could touch, where did that bit come from, too? Because that's always the way I remember people connect to that story. It's like...
Yeah. Well, I try to do something we can connect to. It actually reminds me of something we did with the Hulk, which I loved, and I wish we could do it. I wish it would show up in the film. The Hulk... The problem for the Hulk, the mindless Hulk, that no one had ever asked it why it was so angry. And it's because its skin hurt. That it was in pain.
Yeah.
And so as a beast, it was in pain. And then when the Sentry shows up in the Hulk Sentry,
calms him down.
He says, "Oh, Golden Man," and he's really excited and he's really pleased. He's like a little puppy, and he's really sweet and he's really docile because the Sentry takes away the pain. When he's around the Sentry's glow, it doesn't hurt him anymore, and he loves the Sentry very much, right? And I think that you can do that type of story, all the time. We don't understand other people because we don't live inside their skin and we don't live inside their mind, right? And so I love that kind of story, and I feel like we miss it. It's like we're so busy having people throw punches in comics that we don't remember that there's something to be said about us. So have them throw punches by all means and have stuff blow up with meaning.
Exactly. I agree with that completely. That's something I also feel is lost. Is either mindless action or pushing their own viewpoints in the skin of something. That's the two extremes. I feel.
And pushing viewpoints is a funny one because we're potentially maybe supposing that someone's pushing their viewpoint. I don't know.
I could be wrong. I admit
I'm not very vocal about politics except to say it's a scam. It's a self-enrichment scam. Politicians get rich, right? It's a load of bollocks.
I won't argue that.
Don't hate somebody for being Republican or Democrat because you don't know who they are, right? But what I would say is that you know, as vocal as I am about it not being involved in politics, I see it. We live it, right? We live it all the
Yeah,
time.
of course.
And it never seems to go away. And so my feeling on it is this, you know, that like I lived in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is one of the most liberal towns in this country, right? In Western Massachusetts. And I now live in Forsyth County, Georgia, which is the second most conservative. And it's the same people like that. It's the same people saying the opposite thing.
Exactly.
So I always try to point out to them, like, you have no idea. Like, our entertainment should make us think about people, about life, about the world.
Yes.
Yet we don't do it. We seem to just kind of ignore it and do other things instead. Let's get back to being people primarily and reading stories about ourselves, and then all the other stuff can enter. So, you know, I had that situation with Sally Floyd where I wrote her as a really interesting left-wing character, and people were like, Paul Jenkins is an incredibly left-wing guy.
I did not. Now you're saying that. I remember that. I ignored it. I'm just like, whatever. I still feel bad for Sally.
Yeah, it couldn't be further from the truth. I don't care about politics, right? I don't do any of it. So I must have written a good character, is the point. And I think that, you know,
and again, you made fun of it. I do like that. You made fun of it.
Yeah, made fun. I like the fact of making fun of Sally. That was great, you know, because we just basically made fun of ourselves and went like,
exactly.
I guess she must be the worst character in the Marvel universe, you know. And
I know.
Although for the longest time, Bucky and I me and Mark Buckingham made claim to that because we created Typeface, right? And so Typeface was intentionally created to be a joke, to be like the worst character ever. It was made that way. And so people moaned, "Oh my God, this is the worst character ever." And we're like, exactly.
That's the point.
Terrible.
Exactly.
And he ended up in the Spider-Man film.
Yeah. Like,
and I'm like, how did this happen?
How did this happen?
Right.
So, yeah, I pretty much that's all I have to be talking about. But I really appreciate you coming on, Paul. You've done so much, and getting the insight into your writing really surprised me. There was a lot of stuff, like, again, saying how you've taken a lot from your life and all that stuff really impresses me so much. And I just want to thank you so much for a lot of the work you've done. What are you currently working on right now? Is there any comics or anything, or movies, whatever?
I can say this. Yes, I'm working with Marvel on a couple of things for the first time in maybe 11, 12 years. So that's cool. I got that coming up.
Awesome. I'll keep an eye out for it.
People will know that when they see it. I'm like a quirky guy because I do work across all media, and that includes new technologies, and I often lecture about it. So, and I'm about to say this and piss everybody off. Like, everybody watching, even you, I'm going to say the word NFT, and you're going to go like, "Oh my God!" Right?
I don't care.
Well, I'll tell you what it is that NFTs are actually a fundamental in, you know, like blockchain technology is actually useful because it's all about, like, if you owned a prop, this is what an NFT should have been.
Right.
You own a prop of like one of the original lightsabers from the first Star Wars movie. And if you attach an NFT to it, then now we know its provenance for the rest of its time, right? You'll always know that this thing is genuine and it wasn't a cheat because it has blockchain technology attached.
Yeah, basically it was basically like a seal of approval, certificate of authenticity digitally.
And so you could use it for old masters. You could do it for all kinds. And so you could tie digital into
that. Was the original intent. And then it went off the rails to the point where it became ridiculous.
It was ridiculous, but we were working in that space and we did really well. So once it fell down, you know, it's a shame, right? Because the Web3 blockchain technology is actually useful, but it's just it's a tool like a pencil. Right?
Yes, exactly. Just like AI can be a tool, but unfortunately you have people, again, going to the extremes that taints it and makes it toxic.
Yes, right, exactly. And so people will always do that, but in the end, there's still these useful tools. And so I like to use all the tools available to make stories. So I'm still working across different media, but primarily my focus right now is on film and television. So I've got stuff that we do there, and you know, loads of stuff. And so you never know that with the Sentry coming up at Marvel, there might be some connection.
I wouldn't be surprised. But
we'll see what happens, you know.
But yeah, so now I'll just say this. I bet you NFTs will come back under a different name. Give it a little time to be quiet. Someone's going to rethink it and rejig it, and then people will accept it so long as it doesn't go the extreme again.
Well, they're already doing it, and you just don't know it. It's a little bit like saying you don't like NFTs is a little bit like saying you don't like a website that's got .com at the end of it.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything, because NFTs, as they were done, you shouldn't like it. It was stupid. It was a scam. Everybody got scammed, right? And that's why everybody's frustrated with it, understandably. But that doesn't mean to say we're using the technology already. So we will tell different types of story in Web3. We will mix it with Web2 technologies and tell stories that way. The best way of looking at it would be like this. Imagine if you collected baseball cards and someone said, do you want to collect a digital baseball card? You might go, well, maybe, I don't know if it's that valuable. I like the card in my hand. And they say, okay, what if you had a baseball card of such and such a player, and every time he hit a home run or his stats updated, your card would update overnight? New things, right? That's the kind of thing that I'm working on right now. So there's things to be done with it. It's just we don't do it, you know?
All right, then. Well, keep up the great work. Once again, thank you for all of the great stuff you've worked on. And I wish you luck. And when your books get announced, I assure you I will put them on my poll bin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone else. We'll see you guys on the next one.